Welcome everyone. Today we're going to start and kick off our deep dive into 1984. It's just going to be a 3-week little series where I just give like a 1-hour talk about 1984. The content we're covering shouldn't be new to you all. It should be very familiar. In saying that, I hope you've all read the book. If you haven't, I hope that you get the chance to read it. It is a great book. And I hope this kind of lecture series will serve as like a maybe really quick crash course into 1984. And for those who have read the book, this will be a great opportunity to refresh your knowledge on the contents of the book. So let's get started with a warm-up question. So who can tell me what 2 + 2 equals? If anyone just wants to type the chat in the chat their answer. And first one to get it wins. 5, great. So trick question, Jasmine, you're very close, but the answer is 5 in this case, okay? We've got to remember we are now in the world of Oceania. We're in the world of 1984, where 2 + 2 actually equals 5. So more to come on that later, but yeah, just a quick warm-up question. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Ryan, and I'm going to be taking you through 1984 over the next 3 weeks. So basically, these sessions will be content heavy. I'm going into this with the assumption that you have read the book, so I'm not going to be going through plot details. I'm not going to be going through necessarily what's happened in the book. I'm more focusing on how you're going to be analyzing the book and how you're going to relate it to the common module, okay? So this will largely help your understanding of the content as well as how you write your essays. So how this is going to work is the lectures will focus more on the content heavy side of things, and that way in your lessons with your respective tutors, you have a lot more time to work on your skills and you have a lot more time to practice writing, because unfortunately you guys are approaching your trials very soon. So we want to maximize our time in class as much as we can. So we just thought it'd be a really good idea to have these crash course, like one hour-ish lecture series to go through the content, so you save more time in class for skills. So yeah, with that being said, questions will be saved to the end. I'll open the chat here and there if we have the time, and I can address your questions. And if not, I'll answer everything towards the end. Okay, so we have a lot to cover today. Please get your booklets out and follow along. I will let you know where we will be looking at like as we go, but hopefully we can get through all of this today. We're going to go through the module itself, how 1984 relates to the module, the context, purpose, form, style, the main characters, major motifs, images, and symbols, and we're going to do a little scene analysis of the 2-minute hate as well. So yeah, we have a lot to go through, so I hope you're all ready to go. Get your pens out, highlighters out, anything you might need to annotate your booklet. And yeah, let's get started. So I'm going to read the rubric to you guys right now as a little refresher. I want you to highlight any key phrases, key words that you know or notice, and then we're going to talk through about like each one of them in the next following pages. Okay, so let's begin on page 2, texts and human experiences. In this common module, students deepen their understanding of how texts represent individual and collective human experiences. They examine how texts represent human qualities and emotions associated with or arising from these experiences. Students appreciate, explore, interpret, analyze, and evaluate the ways language is used to shape these representations in a range of texts in a variety of forms, modes, and media. Students explore how texts may give insight into the anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies in human behavior and motivations, inviting the responder to see the world differently, to challenge assumptions, ignite new ideas, or reflect personally. They may also consider the role of storytelling throughout time to express and reflect particular lives and cultures. By responding to a range of texts, they further develop skills and confidence using various literary devices, language concepts, modes, and media to formulate a considered response to texts. Students study one prescribed text and a range of short texts that provide rich opportunities to further explore representations of human experiences illuminated in text. They make increasingly informed judgments about how aspects of these texts, for example, context, purpose, structure, stylistic and grammatical features, and form shape meaning. In addition, students select one related text and draw from personal experience to make connections between themselves, the world of the text, and the wider world. By responding and composing throughout the modules, students develop a repertoire of skills in comprehending, interpreting, and analyzing complex texts. They examine how different modes and media use visual, verbal, and/or digital language elements. They communicate ideas using figurative language to express universal themes and evaluative language to make informed judgments about these texts. Students further develop skills in using meta-language, correct grammar, and syntax to analyze language and express a personal perspective about a text. Okay, so that just sounded like a bunch of waffle, and that is completely okay. That's what we tend to find with Nesta's rubrics. It's just a bunch of words, right? So we've got to break this down even further. So on the next few pages, you've got a table with a bunch of definitions and terms that you should have picked up as you were highlighting. Now, before I begin going through those terms, essentially what the Common Module rubric is asking you to talk about is human experiences, okay? What do we as humans go through and how does it shape who we are? That's essentially what we're going through. But let's break it down even further. So fill this out as I go. I recommend maybe taking screenshots if you think you need to. However, you can write as I talk, or you can do this in your own time for homework as well. It's up to you guys. So individual. So when we're addressing the individual side of human experiences, some human experiences can be unique to one person. However, we also have collective human experiences, meaning a group of people go through these experiences together. And of course, we have experiences themselves, which are the situations and I guess things that we go through essentially that help shape who we are today. Then these experiences kind of help us develop qualities. Okay, so a quality is obviously a distinctive characteristic possessed by someone. Now, these qualities can be positive or negative. It doesn't really have to be one or the other. And I'm sure you guys can think of qualities that you see within yourselves and within characters within 1984 as well. Okay, moving on, we've got emotions. So emotions are obviously our feelings, right? They can be either happiness, sadness, anger, frustration, and the list goes on, okay? Experiences often cause emotions to arise, right? So we want to try and link all these different rubric words back to this essential idea of human experiences. Values. Values are certain regards that we uphold ourselves towards. So these principles are usually important and useful throughout life. Now, within 1984, we see that perhaps these values can be shifted away from maybe what we like to see as like everyday values, right? Within the world of Oceania, we see a big value for the community, right? Conforming of individuals, right? And we see a lack of values towards individuality. And these are kind of the values that we need to explore within our essays as well. So then we have behaviors. Now, behaviors obviously address how we act in certain situations, and different situations can cause different behaviors, right? So a lot of 1984, we are focused on Winston's behavior, right? Whether he reacts in a rebellious way or he conforms, I guess you see progressing throughout the book. However, these behaviors are key based on the experiences that he goes through. Then we have motivations. So the things that drive us to do certain actions, and experiences can motivate us to behave in different ways, okay? Not only experiences though, a lot of other rubric terms that we've already gone through can actually motivate us to go through certain, motivate us to do certain different things, okay? I want us to think about maybe Winston, right? Winston, let's say, for example, he rebels against the party. Can anyone have a go at maybe telling me, using a rubric word, what motivated him to do that? That's not experiences. Anyone want to, feelings, great. Even more specific of a word, emotions, and yeah, values as well, perfect, right? So we see like all these different rubric words are linked, right? So Winston's emotions and values have motivated him to act a certain way, okay? So let's get even more specific, right? Winston's emotions of love for Julia motivates him to rebel against the party, okay? So this is an experience that he goes through, and what motivates him to go through this experience is his emotions of love and his value for love, right? So I just want to reiterate the fact that everything is linked through this module. All right, let's keep going. So then we have complexities. So everything we are discussing right now is complex, okay? Everything is multifaceted, everything's multidimensional. There's not just one linear path in how we approach all these different rubric words, okay? The experiences we go through are complex. The emotions we go through are complex. The values we have are complex, okay? Everything's complex. Ironically, and maybe even a paradox, right? everything in 1984 has been reduced of its complexities, okay? Everything is very singular, okay? We even have doublethink, newspeak, right? Everything is singular and reduced of its complexities. However, maybe we need to reiterate the importance of these complexities. When we're talking about anomalies and inconsistencies, as these two terms are quite similar, we are talking about things that are out of the ordinary, okay? Now, within our own world and our own lives, the things that we are discussing that are anomalous or inconsistent, such as Winston's rebellion, Winston's desire for love, they might not be seen as anomalies and inconsistencies, right? However, if we're viewing this through the worlds of 1984 and Oceania, these are for sure anomalies and inconsistencies, right? So we can say that Winston's behaviors are anomalous, or we could say that his behaviors are inconsistent. His motivations may be inconsistent, right? 1 minute he has love for the party, the next minute he doesn't, right? So we see that he's an inconsistent, unreliable narrator. So all these different rubric words should be addressed as much as you can within your essays. And I just want to reiterate again that they are all linked to each other. Paradoxes is a hard one, and I understand if it's a bit confusing, but essentially paradoxes are things on the surface that just don't make sense, right? Can anyone think of a paradox maybe from 1984 and would like to share it in the chat? Anyone just give it a go. No wrong answers at all. War is peace. Excellent. Okay, so we have the party itself acting as a paradox, right? Usually when we think of a governing body, they should be serving the people. But if anything, they're only serving themselves. And we see that through the party slogans, right? Ignorance is strength, war is peace. Okay, these are paradoxes and acting as opposite to each other. So thank you, Faith. That's a great answer. So we see paradoxes throughout 1984 and representation. So ultimately within your essays and also in any essay you write throughout the HSC, you kind of want to address how these books and these texts represent our lives, right? Represent a message that we want to be conveyed towards us as like ourselves in the 21st century. Okay, so 1984 definitely conveys a certain message. It's a didactic tale towards its audiences, and we'll go through that a bit more in depth later. So that's the rubric summed up. Now, I know I went through that quite quickly, but again, this shouldn't be new to you. This should be a refresher to you. Okay, so for homework, what you guys need to do is go through 1984 and find an example for each of those rubric terms and bring that to your next lesson. Okay. Now, the reason why I place a lot of emphasis on the rubric is because within the HSC and your trials that are coming up, the questions that you get for Common Module will be created from the rubric and its words, okay? You're going to see that all of the practice questions you do will have a rubric word in them. All of the HSC questions you will do, well, the one HSC question you will do will stem from the rubric, okay? And its ideas. So that's why it's really important that you understand the rubric so thoroughly, especially with Common Module, considering there are so many key terms, because what you'll be answering will be based off this rubric. So how much you know about it will dictate how much you can write about it and how well you can answer it, okay? By knowing how everything is linked as well, it will make it like your whole life so much easier to adapt to the question, okay? Because you can take one rubric word from the question, but maybe you prepared an essay that didn't really address that rubric word. However, the essay you prepared, if you know how it links to maybe this rubric word that you've been given, then you can answer the question easily by adapting, if that makes sense. So let's like go through an example. If I've written a practice essay about maybe emotions, okay, however, the question is more about behaviors, then I can maybe talk about how my emotions have driven behaviors, okay? Or let's say I've written just a general essay about how 1984 represents who we are today, okay? But I get a question that's more about the complexities of human emotions. Then I could just link that to representation and talk about how 1984 represents how complex our emotions are and adapt it on the day, right? So it's really important that you figure out these links between these rubric words because it will just make your life a lot easier, okay? All right, so let's flip the page. over to page 6, okay? So let's talk about how this relates to 1984. We want to view 1984 through this common module lens, okay? We want to kind of ask ourselves, how have the experiences Winston has gone through shaped who he is? How does this also reflect us as humans, okay? I have a diagram here that's also in the book, in your booklet, so go through that in your own time, and it just talks about how the common module kind of dictates purpose, how we represent ourselves within these texts, how we as the audience are positioned to view these texts, and what these impacts might be. So from this diagram, you might be able to generate a generic kind of sentence to address the common module within your essays, okay? So does anyone have like any questions so far, or are we all good? All right, I think that means we're all good. So I'm going to read the little paragraph in the booklet, basically talking about how this relates to 1984. When studying 1984, it is important to apply what we call a common module lens as we follow Winston and Julia through their journey. 1984 by George Orwell depicts Winston's experiences in combating the oppressive rule of the party, otherwise known as Big Brother, as he undergoes universal human experiences of rebellion, love, and being monitored 24/7. We are able to see his human behavior and attitudes as he reacts to the situation he finds himself in. We also can see how his human values, emotions, and qualities flourish as he gets a snippet of freedom which we'd expect. Imagine living in a world where everything you normally do is forbidden, right? George Orwell provides a critical discussion into the effects of experiencing an authoritarian rule and how human behaviors would react to such limiting lifestyles. As you revise this fascinating and engaging tale, it is important that you examine how Winston, Julia, and other key characters react to the situations they are in, as their reactions would be and are representative of our own humanity. So again, I'm using my common module lens, and I can say that the human experiences Winston goes through dictate his behaviors, his motivations. It creates emotions with him, it shows his values, right? Everything just links back to this idea of human experiences, and that's how we'd analyze this book. Okay, let's keep going now. So let's talk a bit about context, okay? Now, there's a lot of context to this book, so we'll try to get through as much as we can in the time we have. Firstly, I want to reiterate the importance of context, okay? Within your essays, you should have context with everything you write. Context just talks about what was happening during the time period in which this text was written in. So George Orwell's book was written during 1949, okay? So we're going to deep dive into what was happening during that time, which led Orwell to write this book. So then we often can find through context the purpose of the book and what Orwell wants to convey to his audience, maybe what Orwell's trying to represent, okay? So let's go. So George Orwell was born on the 25th of June, 1903 in Eastern India as the son of a British colonial civil servant. He witnessed an innocent man die in the imperial police in Burma and other killings during the Spanish Civil War, contributing to his hatred towards totalitarianism. Now, for those of you who don't know, totalitarianism is kind of like authoritarianism, where we just have a dictator, right? One ruler and oppressive government. So 1984 was published in 1949 and was used as a personal response to the totalitarian society Orwell had experienced, and also addressing his hatred towards it. Okay, so I've got some more further notes in the booklet that you have in front of you. Orwell began his hate for the abuse of power after experiencing a boarding school that he went to where he was beat. His political views were also influenced by the world he was living in, experiencing poverty and tyranny. So this fueled his wants in wanting to revolutionize the working class. Now we see this within the book because Winston represents the working class, right? We get a very much sense that he doesn't own a lot, right? The Victory mansions, another paradox perhaps, because there's nothing really victorious about them. They smell like cabbage from what I remember, right? This all represents Orwell's own context and what he's witnessed within society and how this shapes what he's written, okay, personally. So within your essays, you should be making statements that address his context and address what he's written, okay? Let's keep going. Let's talk a bit more about political context because politics is a very big part of 1984, and we see that through INGSOC, okay? So Orwell considered himself as a socialist, and socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization, which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. However, we obviously don't really see that within 1984. We see that the party is in complete control, and we see that Big Brother is monitoring everyone 24/7 to make sure that they remain in control, okay? So therefore, we can kind of suggest that Orwell is writing about the dangers of totalitarianism, and he's warning his audiences about the dangers to come if we follow such a regime, okay? Especially considering the rise of the Nazi Party, the rise of Stalin's ideologies, right? This is what Orwell was fearing. So to represent this, Orwell has created INGSOC, Newspeak for English Socialism, right? Which is the philosophy that the regime follows and enforces. This idea of INSOC and the existence of Newspeak, which is a form of language that reduces a lot of the vocabulary you and I have, right, is essentially to control the population and limit their ability to think freely. So why might it be important for, I guess, the party to reduce free thought and to reduce this idea that we have language as well? Why might that be important in terms of Big Brother? Can anyone answer? Maybe I've already said it before. Yeah, exactly, Lynn. Right, to keep control, to maintain control and prevent rebellion, okay? So with language, right, it sparks the generation of free thought and free thinking, and this obviously leads to rebellion. So essentially, Orwell was warning us that if we follow this government regime, this is essentially what our lives will look like. Let's keep going. We're going to talk a bit more about historical context now. So within your booklets, I've got a bunch of context on the historical context, as well as how this can link to 1984. So on the left here, you will see a picture of Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin of the USSR. And this was the Tehran Conference, okay? The outcome of this conference was to open a second front against Nazi Germany. And this conference would have a large impact on the involved states and the population, right, and their progression towards war. Okay, so tensions and disagreements between each of these three parties were revealed, and fears of the potential threat posed by Britain and the USSR post-war were made very clear. So Orwell saw this conference as a manifestation of the future where the world would be divided into states led by bureaucratic managers, for example, Stalin. So he saw this as a prophecy for the dystopian works of other authors and admitted that the conference was one of the main reasons he wrote 1984. So he basically saw this conference as a manifestation of war and what this fear of authoritarianism stemmed from, right? Because of these rising party powers, especially Stalin. So when you're writing your essays, it would be a very good idea, especially if you're writing about control, to maybe reference the Tehran Conference and suggest how Orwell was writing about his rising fears of conforming rule. So if we flip the page, we have, oh, okay, my Google decided to, oh, sorry, something just happened. You guys can still see the presentation okay now, right? Yeah, okay, sorry about that. I think something just popped up. Okay, so let's keep going. On the right side, we have the panopticon, okay? So Jeremy Bentham was an extreme English philosopher known for his radical social views. And this panopticon was a disciplinary concept, okay? Basically, you'd have prisoners within these cells, and then you'd have a guard in the middle. But the catch was that the prisoners would never know whether the guard was watching them or not. Now, this developed during his time, and similar ideas of the panopticon are seen within 1984. Okay, one big one being the telescreens. Okay, so within 1984, you will know that the telescreens are what the citizens fear the most. Okay, everyone's being watched through these telescreens. However, they don't know when and which exact moment they're being watched. So this causes the citizens of 1984 and Oceania to live a life with caution. Okay. So Orwell was again hinting at this, or warning his responders of this rising authoritarian rule and what the consequences of that lifestyle would be. And one being this cautious life we'd have to live under surveillance. Okay. We also see that through propaganda, perhaps, right? We see that within the world of Oceania, there are very big posters such as Big Brother is watching you. Okay. We see this like image of a man with a mustache glaring down at us. Okay. This is just emphasizing this idea of constant surveillance and talking about the fact that these citizens would not be able to have freedom at all, which would suck. We've also got technological advances. Okay, so we have the printing press, analog cameras, mass media. Okay, Orwell utilizes many technological advancements throughout his novel and shows how they contribute and fuel to this idea of surveillance and danger. Okay, printing, right? We have propaganda, like I just talked about. We also have the manipulation of history with printing. Okay, but we'll talk more about that next week. We have cameras. Cameras monitor people through telescreens. We have mass media, again, spreading propaganda and using these telescreens to monitor people, and microphones as well, used by the party to listen to people. So yeah, so that's more on technology. Okay, let's keep going. We also have the concerns of the working class and centralized economy. So Winston definitely represents the working class within 1984, and we see that George Orwell very much advocated for the rights of the working class at the time because they had very little rights and benefits. So employees very much took a huge sum of money and many people barely made by in their lives. So I guess we see that represented through the party taking everything that the citizens of Oceania are working for and them being left with nothing. Now, another big contextual reference is Leon Trotsky. Okay, so Leon Trotsky, I want you all to think of as the opposite towards Stalin. Okay, Leon Trotsky was a Soviet revolutionary Marxist theorist, and he became the leader of a communist party before Stalin came to power and exiled Trotsky. Now, for those of you who have read the book, and for those of you who haven't but know about the book, Goldstein was a very prominent figure within 1984. Now, can anyone tell me in the chat what Goldstein did or who he was essentially? The lack of answers is very reassuring as to how many of you have read the book. Yeah, he made the dictionary. Yep. Does anyone know what his book was called? I don't mind if you Google it very quickly. Does anyone want to tell me what Goldstein's book was called? So I don't know if you guys remember, but midway through the book of 1984, I think it was about midway, you just see a section of just Goldstein's book, which Winston is reading. No one can tell me? Okay, I'll leave that question. The theory and practice of, yes, Wendy, keep going. Yes, thank you, Faith. The theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. Okay, so we're getting there. Goldstein presented this book and it essentially represented freedom. Okay, so we see that within 1984, Goldstein is seen as the enemy. If you guys think about the 2-minute hate, right? It is basically 2 minutes in the day where all the citizens of Oceania can hate Goldstein. Okay, so Orwell had strong democratic socialist beliefs and wanted to eradicate totalitarianism, and these views influenced him to display his perspective and benefits of socialism, essentially Goldstein's ideologies. So I want you guys to remember that within the book, Goldstein's never really established as an actual character, right? So there are interpretations where Goldstein might not be an actual person, but an entity. And this entity would have been made by the party. Okay, so perhaps the party created this figure called Goldstein to manipulate people into thinking how negative freedom is and how, we should be following this oppressive lifestyle. Okay, so when you're writing an essay about perhaps rebellion or freedom or this need for individuality, you guys can reference Leon Trotsky, you can reference Goldstein and talk about this contextual link. We also have the Hitler Youth. Okay, so the Hitler Youth was a youth movement led by Kurt Gruber with the main kind of goal to attract young men who could be trained and, I guess, represent these ideologies, Stalin's ideologies. So they wore uniforms, and as we can see here, and rallied Nazi views. So Orwell was influenced by this idea of Hitler Youth so much to formulate the junior spies. Okay, you see that within the book, we have a family of a Smith who almost says that they are proud if their children would turn them in, okay, because they are kind of the next generation. They're leading this idea of oppressive governments, right? So children are often very important when we think about political powers because they often represent this next generation. Yeah, so they kind of exemplify this idea of the thought police as well, where, again, obviously our thoughts are being policed. So Orwell's involvement in and views of the Spanish Civil War and London. Okay, Orwell witnessed the rise of totalitarianism, like we've already mentioned, and he was already pro-socialist. Okay, British civilization was highly vulnerable to internal weaknesses stemming from an enemy within. Okay, the cowardice among those who remained in London during the war. And in Barcelona, Orwell witnessed an unequal society with the poor working class not being able to afford bread and more privileged class having access to a lot more different things in life. Okay. On the side there, I've got links to 1984, which I won't go through too much right now because we might not have the time. However, we all know that now this is just 1984 mirroring the society, okay, where the inner party members have high access to high quality foods while the lower class eat rations. The inner party also dictates how these citizens live whilst adjusting everything for their own benefit. When he arrived in Barcelona as well, everyone called each other comrades, which we see in 1984. So again, all these contextual elements and contextual references influence what has been written in 1984. And your job is to talk about that, essentially, talking about maybe 1 to 2 sentences in each body paragraph, talking about these different contexts and how this is seen within 1984. The last one's pretty much the exact same as what we've gone through, so I won't go through that right now. So let's turn over to page 14, the purpose of 1984. So again, context links to purpose. So you kind of need to write in your essays this essential purpose statement. So I put a quote in your book that's for you. This is a novel about the future. It is in a sense a fantasy, but in the form of a naturalistic novel. So if we unpack this quote, Orwell is basically saying that this is what he thinks the future will look like. Although it is fiction and it is a fantasy, it is a very naturalistic fantasy tale in terms of this could very much be inevitable and this could very much be a society that we can see ourselves being put into. Okay, so the job of a writer is to question the world we live in. Okay, and this is also the reason why we study the texts we do. If you think about your other texts that you study, Keats, Bright Star, the movie, really great movie, by the way, and oh, why can't I remember? It's escaped my mind. King Henry, right? Shakespeare. All these texts say something about the world we're living in, and 1984 is no exception. So we can kind of treat 1984 as a novel of warning. Okay, George Orwell wrote 1984 just after World War II, and he is warning his readers of this idea of a totalitarian society and what this would kind of impede upon our free thought and speech. So in your essays, you can always address it as a cautionary tale, a warning, a didactic tale, didactic just meaning that it teaches us something. And Orwell himself has claimed 1984 to be a warning rather than a prediction, making it a didactic dystopia. And then obviously we are fighting against totalitarianism. And for those of you who have already forgotten, hopefully not, but totalitarianism is a regime where the political power stays in power and they have an all-encompassing campaign that kind of limits the rights and freedoms of its citizens. Okay, so I know we just went through a lot of context in one go. Use the week to kind of mull over the context, mull over what's happening. If you want to do your own research and dig deeper into these contextual elements, by all means, go ahead. However, I've kind of just summarized it for you guys so you have just enough knowledge to include in your essays. However, you can easily link it into 1984 and, you know, what actually happens within 1984 itself. So yeah, does anyone have any questions so far, or are we happy to move on? I know this is like generally the more boring stuff that we have to get through, but next week we'll talk a lot more about the themes, and then the following week we'll talk a lot more about essay writing itself. Okay, looks like no one really has any questions, which is good. We have about 15 minutes left. Okay, so let's talk about the form and style. So Orwell uses his famous plain prose style to convey a sense of truth. So making it a more simplistic story really allows the story to focus a lot more on its key ideas. We also have third-person limited narration and also unreliable narration. Okay, so a really big aspect of this book is that it comes majority from Winston's perspective. Okay, in fact, all of it is from Winston's perspective. However, Winston doesn't know everything, right? Winston presents to us a very maybe inconsistent perspective towards this world of Oceania. On one hand, he loves the party and has love and loyalty for the party, but on the other hand, you know, Julia kind of like inspires this rebellion out of him, and he like gets a taste of freedom and gets a taste of love, and he can't give that up either, right? So he's kind of stuck in the middle and he doesn't know where he wants to pursue. Okay, so this idea of an unreliable narrator is very prominent throughout the whole book, and it makes us as the audience almost not even trust Winston. Okay, like we don't know what Winston's next move is. We don't know, you know, like it's unpredictable what he'll do. Okay, so this is obviously done purposefully, and by doing this, Orwell kind of presents, you know, a character that we can represent ourselves within, right? Because it's not straight up loyalty for the party, and it's not straight up rebellion. It's confusion, right? And we figure out this journey with Winston. Like we said before, it is a dystopian text, okay? Dystopian being that it represents the future, and, or in this case, Orwell's future, right? And what he thought the future could turn into. Yeah, so for Orwell to think clearly, one must write clearly as well. So 1984 models this clarity, which is critical to independent thought. At the same time, the language is oppressive and dull, mimicking the deadening effect of life under the party's rule. And this is seen through Newspeak. So yeah, when we're talking about form and style, it is critical that you mention form and style within your introductions and body paragraphs, if possible. One point I really want you guys to talk about is unreliable narration. Okay, the other elements, you know, it's just more for your own knowledge, and you can mention it. There's nothing wrong with mentioning it. However, a very big and key feature within 1984 is its use of third-person limited narration. Okay, so I really think that you guys should be mentioning that within your essays. And to kind of help you guys mull over your thoughts for homework, we've got a following question there, which was, how has Orwell's dystopian tale 1984 utilized its form to reflect on his contextual concerns? So maybe there you can give a go at writing a response about unreliable narration. Okay, let's talk about some of the main characters that you guys should be very, very, very familiar with, as well as linking them to the rubric itself. Okay, so let's begin with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Winston. Okay, so this is a photo from the movie 1984. If you guys haven't read the book and don't really know the plot of the book, check out the movie. It is pretty similar, and like plot-wise, it is pretty similar to what happens. Whether it is a good movie or not, that is up to you guys and your own opinions. But for me, it was all right. It was all right. So if you haven't read the book, I recommend watching the movie at least, okay? But also read the book. So Winston is the protagonist who is legally married to the stiff, brainwashed, and desireless Catherine. unable to produce children together, living separately, and are forbidden from remarrying. So we see that established that he is just very unhappy with his life. A very big symbol of that is his varicose ulcer. Okay, Winston has a varicose ulcer throughout his the journey throughout his book, right? And we see that when he meets Julia, his varicose ulcer doesn't bother him anymore, right? In the beginning of the book, he kind of describes how the varicose ulcer gives him pain. It's itchy, it's gross, it's pussy, yeah. But once he meets Julia, all that kind of disappears. Okay, so we can kind of see that this varicose ulcer could be a symbol for Winston's unhappiness towards his life and his need for like sexual activity as well. So he has a monotonous, repetitive life in which his pleasures come from scratching ulcers, like I've just mentioned, drinking gin, and writing in an illegal novel. Okay, so in a little bit, I'm going to talk more about the motifs and symbols where we'll unpack this diary, okay, that he has. So his pleasures experience a significant uptick when he begins his affair with the young and beautiful Julia, who is 10 to 15 years younger and declares her love for Winston through a note. So we see him notice Julia, I think, first within the 2-minute hate. So we'll talk more about Julia in a bit, but let's talk about how Winston kind of represents the rubric. So Winston is an inconsistency within society as he has beliefs that go against the party, okay? So again, that should be pretty self-explanatory, and this is definitely a statement that you can be putting in your essays. He has human qualities and emotions that are anomaly in the totalitarian state: desire, rebellion, intelligence, whilst all other members of society are like-minded, brainwashed by the party. So Winston represents who we are, okay? I don't think anyone in this Zoom call, anyone I know, would be able to live the way all the other citizens of Oceania do. Okay, so Winston represents how we as humanity would react within a totalitarian state. And thus Orwell is able to talk about the need to stray away from this oppressive regime. So Winston, he is paradoxical in nature as he is the novel symbol of hope. Okay, we see that throughout Winston's journey. We kind of rooting for him. We want him to break free of the party. We want him to fall in love with Julia. But eventually, you know, we know the outcomes don't go in our favor, where he is taken into room 101 and he is tortured until he gives up Julia and kind of says, do it to Julia instead of me. Okay, so we see that this paradox of a symbol of hope, however, he isn't. So yeah, that's Winston, and that's how I want you all to kind of consider Winston in terms of how he links to the Common Module rubric. And this can very much be within your essays, okay? Your essays, your themes will be talking about like individual human experiences. However, you should never feel bad in terms of unpacking a character more, talking about how they are characterized and how they link to the rubric. Okay, let's move on to the rebellious Julia. Again, this is Julia from the movie. So this is what she looks like. Julia is Winston's love interest and his ally in the struggle against Big Brother. She represents the elements of humanity that Winston does not. So pure sexuality, cunning, and survival. Okay, I'm going to add to that rebellion as well. While Winston simply manages to survive, Julia is a true survivalist, using any means necessary to conduct her self-centered rebellion. However, I wouldn't also say it's self-centered. I'd say it's self-centered in her case, but if we're looking at a grand scheme of things and Orwell's purpose, we want this for the rest of society as well. So her demeanor is that of a zealous party follower, but just under that thin surface is an individual with unchecked human desires and a willful spirit, which ultimately results in her capture. And then we see Winston's captured in room 101, he gets tortured, and he betrays Julia, the ultimate act of the party winning. Okay, so if we're talking about rubric links, and this is in your booklets as well, she has human qualities, emotions, and she has human qualities and emotions of desire, love, and intimacy, which are also anomalous within a totalitarian state. I have a question for you guys, and feel free to write your answers in the chat. Do you think Julia is inconsistent like Winston? So we know Winston's inconsistent because he kind of flips back and forth, but would you say Julia is inconsistent? And explain why you think yes or no. Again, no wrong answers. You all know each other as well, so don't be afraid to write an answer out. So I'll tell you guys my opinion, and then you can quickly type in the chat. Oh yeah, I agree. I wouldn't say Julia is that inconsistent. I'd say that she is pretty consistent with her continuous rebellious behavior. Or in other words, pretty consistent with her anomalous behavior. Okay, so maybe she acts as a contradiction to Winston and brings out this inconsistent rebellious behavior within him. However, Julia, I believe, is a very consistent character in how she acts. We also don't see much from her, and we don't know that much about her. We only know what Winston knows, okay? And that is attributed to Winston's unreliable narration again. So yeah, we don't actually know much from her perspective, except for the fact that she's a rebellious person. So that's my take. If you guys have a different take, that is also completely fine. Feel free to put it in the chat below. The last character I wanted to focus on is O'Brien. Okay, O'Brien is a prominent leader in the inner party who appears to be a friend or co-conspirator of the protagonist Winston until the third part of the novel, when he is exposed as an inner party leader who had been watching Winston for years. So he is a symbol and a representation of the party and all its contradictions and cruelty. As an extension, he represents this idea of an authoritarian regime and Orwell's fears of one. Okay, so the character of O'Brien is not so different from many of the contemporary leaders of the 20th century, such as Hitler and Stalin, who used this kind of torture to keep their power, and it did it in the name of purity in the population. Okay, O'Brien represents these leaders and others who use cruelty and torture as their primary method of control. Now, a really interesting note about O'Brien is that, like we said here, he is revealed to be an inner party leader. However, before we kind of saw him as a co-conspirator of Winston. We saw him as a friend, okay? So if we go back, this represents Winston's unreliable narration, okay? He doesn't know everything, and we figure out this world of Oceania with him, okay? With O'Brien, what rubric words do you think describe O'Brien, or what rubric words can you link to O'Brien? Okay, let's like quickly flip back, sorry. Is it experience, qualities, emotions, values, behaviors, motivations, complexities, anomalies, inconsistencies, paradoxes? What do you guys think? Again, you can throw in, okay, cool. Yes, okay, great. So why do we think complexities? Why do we think paradoxes? Why do we think representation? Now, the trick of this answer is almost all the rubric words would apply, right? So you just need to give me a little justification as to why you think so. Also, all correct, by the way, all right. Okay, cool. So we know that O'Brien is a complex character is because he isn't as he seems. Okay, he is multifaceted. Lynn agrees with Wendy. Great. Jasmine says that he represents the totalitarian leaders in the real world. Excellent. And Faith, yes, he is a paradox because he isn't what he appears to be on the surface and acts as a contradiction to himself. Perfect. So I'm glad you guys are getting it. So again, notice just how like you can apply any rubric words to the characters, and this ultimately helps you adapt your essays on the day because you can always just switch out these rubric words and use which ones you need to answer the question while still having explored these ideas within your essay. Okay, so there are a lot of other characters within this book, but we don't really have time to go through them. So I'm just going to list them off the top of my head, and you guys can do a little bit more digging into it or ask your tutors. You've got Syme, who created Newspeak. You've got, and who was ultimately vaporized. So why do we think Syme was vaporized? Do we know? Or do we know who Syme is? I hope you do, but Why do we think Syme was vaporized? He was knowable. Yes, that is very true. So he knew too much, and he knew too much about knowledge. Wendy says, yes, knowledge. Knowledge 100. He knew too much, and he obviously ultimately got vaporized by the party because he could reveal too much about the party's overwhelming control. We also have Mr. Charrington, who was the owner of the shop that Winston buys all his little trinkets from. He was also the shop owner of Winston's diary, and where Winston found the little coral glass paperweight. He also owns the shop where Winston and Julia kind of meet up to have their little love time, right? So Mr. Charrington is actually revealed to be part of the thought police. Okay, so we see that all these characters are not what they seem. Okay, so they can all be paradoxes, they can all be complex. Okay, and you can apply all these rubric words towards them. But I do suggest reading into those characters if you're not sure who they are. Yeah, cool. Let's keep moving on. Okay, so key motifs, symbols, and imagery. Okay, so we're going to go through all these different ones. This is going to be a really great resource for you guys if you're not too sure of evidence. These are very big pieces of evidence that you can look for within the book, or you can search up online quotes about the glass paperweight within 1984 and find quotes about that. However, we've summarized it all into a list for you guys, so you can kind of categorize it based on what you want to explore within your body paragraphs. Okay, so let's go through all of them, or as much as we can. So the glass paperweight first appears when it is sold to Winston by Mr. Charrington. This paperweight acts as a motif representing Winston's failed attempts at connecting to the past. Okay, so it represents the fragility of human relationships as well, particularly the bond between Winston and Julia. And we know that the paperweight shatters when they are captured by the thought police. So this shattering ultimately represents the shattering of their relationships and the broken bonds that humanity could potentially create with each other. This paperweight is also significant due to the room it was found in, which is a place where Winston and Julia meet, and this is separated completely from Oceania. So if you want to write, a body paragraph about human relationships or history, you can use this glass paperweight. Big Brother. So Big Brother is definitely a symbol throughout this book. Big Brother is not necessarily a character itself, but an entity that the party has created to instill fear amongst its citizens. The overwhelming rule the party has is represented through the symbol. We consistently hear the repeated phrase, Big Brother is watching you, a quote you guys can use within your essays, acting as a slogan in establishing the party's overwhelming control. Winston learns in Goldstein's book that Big Brother is not a real person, rather an invention of the party that subjects emotions of fear and caution amongst Oceania's population. So if you're going to talk about, overwhelming control, or surveillance or propaganda within your essays, I definitely recommend using this symbol. The telescreens, okay? So telescreens again represent the constant surveillance throughout 1984, okay? Again, if you want to tie into this theme of overwhelming control or surveillance, use the telescreens. And now the proles. Okay, we haven't talked about the proles yet. Winston hears a woman singing outside his window, and this is the red arm prole woman. The red arm prole woman represents his strong desires for a simple world, one where he can indulge in his pleasures with no surveillance. So Orwell kind of uses the proles as representation for hope for the future. We see that Winston kind of says that if there is any hope, it lies within the proles, okay? But the proles are too ignorant to kind of take action. They just go about their own lives. So yeah, if you're talking about this need for rebellion, the proles could be a very good symbol there. Okay, so let's keep going. Room 101. In the climax of the novel, Orwell introduces Room 101, a mysterious room where Winston finds himself when he is caught for rebelling. Okay, so this room represents the consequences of rebellion and not accepting the party's rule. So again, if you want to talk about, overwhelming control, or if you want to talk about the need for rebellion, I would suggest using Room 101 as talking about the consequences of these ideals. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, actually, a big thing about Room 101 is also talking about how much the party knows. Okay, so we can even talk about maybe surveillance there. So we know that within room 101, where Winston gets tortured, the party knows his biggest fear, which is rats, right? A very personal piece of knowledge, but they still know that already. So again, this attributes to the level of surveillance they have within room 101. Winston's diary. So the first thing that Winston purchases from Mr. Charrington's shop is a diary, and the part of its appeal is how it is from another time. Now, Winston's diary serves as the first act of rebellion within this book, because Winston kind of puts out his own free thoughts, right? He writes down his own free thoughts. So this diary symbolizes this need for individuality and this need for free speech. So I recommend, if you're writing about that, use Winston's diary as talking about the antithesis to everything that follows after. Goldstein's book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, is a fictional book that represents rebellion as well within 1984, and it is used as the catalyst within the novel. However, we don't really know if Goldstein is real. We don't really know if Goldstein's book was made by the party or is an actual real written piece of work by Goldstein. Okay, so we could potentially talk about propaganda there, but I definitely think talk about rebellion for Goldstein's book. Now, the 2-minute hate. The 2-minute hate is used to psychologically excite the crowd into an emotional frenzy of hatred, fear, and loathing for Emmanuel Goldstein. The hate session includes the participants, such as Julia, throwing items at the telescreen, showing the film as he does. So one interesting about the 2-minute hate is that the party is so against emotions, right? But the only time they really allow emotions to be expressed is when they're hating on Goldstein, the enemy. Okay, so again, it attributes to this idea of overwhelming control and manipulation by the party, talking about how you are only allowed to express what you think if it's aligning with the party's views, and during the 2 minutes of the day. We have Julia. So Julia, although she is a character, she definitely represents, this idea of rebellion, as well as the need for human connection. So we see that Winston very much, the tone in the novel changes when Winston is with Julia. Okay, we see a much more positive connotation towards love and human connection. So this is Orwell kind of suggesting that we as humans need this. Okay, she creates a sense of loyalty to something/someone else other than the party within Winston. So Julia advocates individual rebellion, while Winston advocates a societal change within the collective, if that makes sense. So I'll say that again. Julia represents this need for rebellion within the individual, with that being Winston, talking about how he needs this human connection and love. However, Winston represents this societal change, okay, and he wants to make change for the society. Unfortunately, he doesn't. 2 + 2 = 5. So this throws back to my earlier question. Mathematics is considered to be entirely abstract in the Oceania. So the party saying how 2 + 2 = 5 essentially makes a claim as to how much control they have. They have control over every aspect of objective reality, even abstract thought. Okay, so the party kind of reduces the lack of logical thinking to make sure that, you know, the citizens of Oceania don't have the capabilities to rebel. And then we have the ministries. So within the book, we are presented with 4 ministries: peace, love, truth, and plenty. However, these ministries act as paradoxes to each other. Okay, for example, plenty commands economy, rations, supplies, and goods. However, the lives of the citizens of Oceania, we would not consider as plentiful at all. In fact, it would be the opposite, right? We see Winston kind of representing, again, this lower class where they're given absolutely nothing, while the party is given everything. We have peace, which manages war and military. Love, enforcing loyalty to Big Brother through fear. Okay, love kind of commands room 101 as well. And truth, which manages intelligence, history, political ideology, and news. However, with the Truth Ministry, we know that Winston worked for the Ministry of Truth and rewrote historical documents. So we know that this idea of truth isn't necessarily true because Winston rewrote history. Okay, again, all serving as a paradox. What do you guys think the effect of rewriting history is in terms of control of the party? What do we think the effect of rewriting history might be? Propaganda. Excellent. Okay, so makes things fit in their narrative. Yeah, great. So rewriting history serves as a method of propaganda, as the party can rewrite history in a way that fits their own agenda and makes the citizens of Oceania stay loyal to the party and hate entities such as Goldstein. So excellent. We also have party slogans such as war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength, and get engraved on these buildings. Again, all serving as a paradox to each other. So your job for homework is to find a quote and provide analysis for each of these motifs and symbols and images. Now, if you have the time and effort, I'd definitely suggest doing all of it. However, if not, at least pick 4 that you know you might want to include in your essays and finish that off. Once you have done so, answer the following question. Throughout 1984, Orwell utilizes significant literary devices to emphasize the importance of unique individual experiences. Evaluate this statement with the use of at least 2 quotes. So I recommend using 2 quotes with each being a different motif and symbol to really widen your evidence and knowledge of 1984. Cool. Okay, any questions about that, please leave in the chat. Otherwise, we'll continue. Okay, so I've already talked about the 2-minute hate, so I won't spend too much more time on it. You guys know what the 2-minute hate now is, which, well, we should have known already, but as a reminder, the 2-minute hate serves as an opportunity for those to express their emotions. However, we know that it's only used as an expression towards the hatred for Goldstein and fitting the party's agenda. What I've done for you is I provided you all with a quote table full of quotes and techniques for each of those quotes already. So you guys need to just write an effect statement in the cell on the right with these quotes, okay? I hope that is helpful if you were to use a 2-minute hate. However, it will be helpful for you to answer the following question. How has George Orwell demonstrated the party's overwhelming rule through utilizing the 2-minute hate, and use at least 3 quotes within your response? Then lastly, I've provided you with a further techniques table and quotes used in 1984. So definitely check that out. And this is your quote bank, essentially, with a lot of key quotes. However, don't let this limit you in terms of finding more of your own quotes as well. Okay, we have provided you with a lot of sample analysis as well. However, you will need to use, if you were to kind of take these quotes, you will need to reword these analyses into your own words within your essays. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up our first session this week. I've covered a lot of content and tried to summarize it into the key points that you will need for your essays coming to your trials. If you have any questions, now is the perfect time to put it in the chat. If not, next week, we are going to be talking a lot more about the themes of 1984. So, you know, if you want to do a little pre-reading beforehand, I suggest you do so. The book that you have will have what I'm talking about already. If not, and you want to leave it as a complete surprise, that is also okay as well. However, none of this should be new to you guys anyway. Finish the responses that are within your booklets, as your tutors will be going through them with you. Jasmine, the next lesson will be from 11 a.m. till 12 p.m. So the next 2 sessions will be from 11 till 12 because you guys are on school holidays. However, if there's any problems, I will be recording them anyway for you guys to catch up on if you need. So bring any questions you might have. If you don't have any questions right now, but you come across any questions in the future, you can always email me or through the center, or you can talk to your respective tutors about any questions you might have as well. Okay, so if no one has any questions, I will hang around for about 5 to 10 minutes. And if not, you are free to go. I hope this first session was helpful. I know, again, we condensed a lot of content into like an hour. So I really think use this week to mull over this knowledge, get your quotes and notes organized for 1984, add anything that you might find useful from this booklet into your existing notes on 1984. or use this booklet as your existing notes for 1984 if you don't have any yet. But definitely work through the activities in here, and hope you are all keen for next week. But yeah, you guys are free to go if you don't have any questions. Thank you for being a great audience so far, and I'll catch you all next week. All